the Misfits.
Hey everybody, we're back. Brandon's back.
That's right.
Brandon's back. He's making his 2024 debut.
True, yeah, because the last time was for the 12 Days of Misfits.
Yes. Have you recovered?
I have, mentally. My mom was also going through that at the same time, and so she was trying to keep
How'd she
score.
do?
I did better.
Oh.
So she was like, that was challenging. I'm impressed that you were able to even get the ones that she did have, and she also agreed that there should have been a little checklist of ones that were already used.
You guys just want cheat sheets. That's all
right.
you want. So yeah, Brandon's back. He's recovered. We are continuing today in two different series, in a way. So we've been doing the quote-unquote mini-series so far this year of looking at things that just people have a hard time understanding within Christianity.
That was a light way of saying it there.
That's the nice way of saying it. I don't remember how we've been saying it, but that's the nice way of saying it. So we started with the live stream where we did pastors. We talked about pastors. We talked about the office of pastor. We talked about the role of a pastor. We talked about pastoral trust and pastoral relationships and all that good stuff with the Kingdom on the Road guys. We then, last week, Tamiko and I were walking through the idea of loving our enemies and what that actually looks like and what that actually means, and the fact that we aren't even supposed to have enemies in the first place. Next week, either with Joel Bowman and Dr. Hudson, or one of the two in a two-parter, we are going to be looking at things like ecclesiology and worldview and missiology. But today, we are looking at something that, again, is misunderstood a lot in a lot of different contexts, and also happens to be continuing our Fruit of the Spirit series that was an accident all the way around. So, Brandon, what are we talking about today?
So today we are talking about wisdom.
Wisdom.
And people, as I said, the topic are probably like, all right, Brandon and Andrew, that is not listed as the fruit. No, I was going to say it's not listed as the fruit of the Spirit.
Well, neither was contentment or thankfulness, or there was another one we did also that wasn't technically on the list.
But we'll get into why.
Yes, as we've shown, there are more fruits of the Spirit than are listed in Galatians. And yes, the Bible does actually list them as things that are fruits of the Spirit, just doesn't use those words. So stay with us. We'll show you again, we're not making things up. The other thing you may be questioning is, how is this complicated? Because of the fact that the idea of biblical wisdom is something that most people think is pretty straightforward. When you think of biblical wisdom, what's the first thing that pops in your head? And I know what your answer is because it's what you texted me yesterday.
Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. So the first thing that comes to mind is always Solomon. He's, I'll say, like the father figure, figure of wisdom. He's the one that asked for it.
He asked for it instead of riches or longevity or love, domination or anything else. And so God said, okay, you get all of it.
Yeah.
You pulled the right straw. You get all of it.
As long as you follow after me, I will.
And we saw how well that went.
Yes.
So that's the first place. The second place is what you actually texted me, which is what?
It's Proverbs.
Proverbs, the writings of wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got Proverbs, you've got Ecclesiastes, you've got Song of Solomon, some of the Psalms as well that are considered the writings of wisdom. Proverbs a lot of times even will be listed as the book of wisdom. There are a couple other things that kind of get associated with it. One of them is the phrase, the fear of the Lord, because of the proverb.
Yeah, Proverbs 1.
Proverbs 9.
Or 9. Well, it's also 1.
The fear of the Lord is
the beginning of
wisdom, right?
Wisdom, yeah.
Wisdom, fear of the Lord literally are put together. It's also something that for people that have studied in a very watered down and not with a Jewish person, Judaism, it's one where it's listed as either a part of God or an attribute of God. It's listed as a factor of creation or a part of creation. We asked the question online as to what you think of when you think, and we got answers like discernment. We got answers of just knowledge. We got answers of one answer that was a little bit interesting and I kind of liked, even though I'm not quite sure where he was going with it. Was one person had said the wisdom was the actual living out of faith rather than just knowing it.
Yeah, I like that because I think it takes the head knowledge and puts it down to, okay,
It
I
adds
need
application to it,
to be able to have an action plan to
which
carry it out.
is not something I've ever heard anybody attribute to wisdom. But I was like, okay, we're going to go with that because that's a good one. Other things that are associated with it is the idea of beauty. Wisdom and beauty are always put together a lot of the times within the Proverbs and the Psalms and the prophets. It's also a term that is used just about deep knowledge and deep consideration and actually considering others. So this is why it also sometimes wisdom is an idea of loving God and loving neighbor, even though that's probably a little bit of a stretch, but we'll go with it. The definitions for it, though, are where it's going to become why it becomes very complicated because there's a lot of them. Our good friend Webster says it's the quality of having experience, knowledge, and good judgment, or the quality of being wise. So it's all about knowledge and understanding.
Yeah. Sometimes I like to define it as the ability to determine what is right and wrong.
I guess that would probably be under good judgment.
Correct.
But I think that would you say that your idea of saying what is right and wrong is different than just good judgment? Or is it just like I know right from wrong?
Well, there's a difference between knowing right from wrong and then carrying it out and, again, taking action upon it, like the one person said in their definition. So, and then there's the debate too of, well, who determines what is right and wrong?
Right.
From a either human moral standpoint or from a godly standpoint of who's determining the boundaries that we're playing in. And I think there's moral goods that we could collectively say of, okay, 95% of people would say this is a good thing, or even biblically speaking, there's many ways of, okay, this is a commandment that God has called believers to live within. And so even though we may know that in our head, how are we carrying that out in obedience in our heart and actions?
And so that was kind of where I was when we talk about good judgment for wisdom, is morality actually what they are focused on? With a lot of within culture, we'll just go within culture. Do you think that morality is what they mean when they talk about good judgment, or are they talking just actually making good choices? Because like you said, there is a big difference, especially biblically. There's a big difference. Where do you think most people draw the line between making good choices and being wise and moral decision making?
Yeah, I think probably the difference, I think morality plays a part in that, as kind of your internal compass. But again, people's morals are different, I would say, both culturally and individually. And so sometimes morality can very much fluctuate versus a true right or wrong.
Well, and that inner moral compass would be what? For you,
for me, it would be the Holy Spirit or
which
Christ.
Is why, for those that already doubted whether or not wisdom was a fruit of the Spirit, there it is. Now,
I love how you were like, I'm going to get this out somehow.
We're going to get it out somehow. So, like we said, Webster's is not a bad. It's not a bad one. But it's watered down to the point where it can be it can be twisted in a lot of different ways. The Old Testament uses a lot of different words to describe wisdom. We're going to look at the main three. One of them is chokmah, which literally is just wisdom. But it means skilled work, which is not something we normally think of when we think of wisdom, because we're thinking of wisdom as Solomon.
Yeah. And part of that, I guess, could come from Webster's first part of the definition, the quality of having experience. So if you have lived experience, you should, not always, should have skilled work.
Well, we actually do think of skilled work as, or skilled worker as someone who is wise. We just don't use those terms within our context.
And again, we would say wise in that field. They might not be
right. And that's the key is that if you are going and when you go to the doctor and want him to diagnose you and heal you, you expect him to make wise decisions within his field because he is skilled there.
Yeah, but you don't bring him your car when
you don't bring him the car unless he's also a mechanic. Wisdom is skilled work. It's not actually as complicated as we think when we're looking at it, because when we think of wisdom, we are thinking in terms of Solomon and not terms of what wisdom actually is. And that's part of why this discussion gets very, very confusing very, very fast, even though everybody is pretty sure they know what wisdom actually means. But that chokmah word also is talking about shrewd administration. It's also a word to describe ethics, which is why you were talking about the fact that it's not about just, is this a good choice or a bad choice? There's a morality to the decision making as well when we're talking about wisdom. It's also a divine attribute. A divine attribute meaning that this is something that is attributed as something that only comes from God. And wisdom is something that is a learned behavior. So it is not something that just comes naturally. It has to be learned. Which, if you combine D and E of divine attribute and learned behavior, you get the same descriptions that we've talked about with things like contentment and thankfulness and prayer and other spiritual disciplines. Because it is something that only comes from God and that has to be learned.
Would you say learned experience could also be learned behavior is also experience?
And that's where the Webster's definition comes in, right? Mm-hmm. Because again, we're talking about wisdom in a couple of different ways. Generic wisdom is a learned, skilled work. But the biblical idea of wisdom as a fruit of the Spirit is a divinely learned behavior. And there's a difference between a learned behavior and a experienced worker.
Mm-hmm.
Behavior is a lifestyle. Experienced worker means that they passed all their tests.
Yeah.
Or we hope they passed all their tests. The second word that we see here is bene, which is to discern, which most people would agree that is what wisdom is, but we use discernment in a different way most of the time. But discernment basically would be understanding or an all-encompassing experience. When you are talking about discernment, do you normally think of it with the five senses?
I typically wouldn't. I more so think of, maybe because I'm more future minded, I think of like what are going to be the outcomes in the end. Sometimes I think of, all right, what's the two outcomes that are going to happen? But obviously there can be a lot more than just a black and white answer. But I think of, all right, discerning what are my outcomes that are going to happen from said decision.
That wouldn't be discernment based off of these definitions. And I'll explain why when we get to the third one. But this is, again, why we're saying the Jewish understanding of wisdom is extremely in-depth. It's like we said, there was the wisdom as far as like what Webster's was talking about, but then there's also the wisdom that is coming from God alone. That wisdom is also the one that was a part of the creation of the world, which is why there was order at creation as opposed to chaos, which is what all the other myths have. But this idea of discernment is something that is all encompassing. It's not just, I'm going to think about this hard and determine decisions and everything like that. It's saying where we are actually saturating ourselves in the problem that we are trying to discern about. And so it's something where the descriptions that are used are supposed to be ones of like, this is what I am seeing. This is what I feel. This is what it tastes like. This is what it smells like. This is what I am hearing about this, so that I can make a fully informed decision based on everything that I am able to experience about what is going on. That's way more in depth than we normally talk about discerning the spirits.
Yeah, because that's what I was going to say. Would you say it's really discerning with the Holy Spirit to say, okay, I know my emotions are misleading, as we see. And so, okay, Holy Spirit, what are you discerning me from a wise standpoint to do? Even if I would say even if it's beyond my understanding.
Right, as Christians, we would say yes. The general idea, it wouldn't necessarily have to be. And again, this is the difference between two guys of Western culture talking about this and people from any other culture. Western culture is fast moving and fast paced, and if you're too slow, you miss out.
Mm-hmm.
This idea of actually sitting in it and thinking on it, meditating on it, is something that is practiced in pretty much every other culture that is outside of the Western world, because they want to make sure that they have actually understood what it is that's going on around them. It's probably a much better better idea and practice of discernment than what we normally do, especially for those of us that are believers, where we talk about what you just said of that we are letting the Spirit actually saturate us.
Mm-hmm.
Our decisions are probably going to come out a lot better when we let that happen than just thinking it through very, very carefully, but still very, very quickly.
Yeah.
The third one, which is what you actually were talking about when you were defining discernment, is sakal, which is about consideration. It's about shrewdness and prudence and about giving extreme attention to. You're looking at what this is actually going to produce. If I do this, what is the outcome?
You're measuring the cost.
Measuring the cost is that's the shrewdness side of it.
Mm-hmm.
It's about actually looking at what literally considering what my actions may produce. Which, again, with the way we talk about discernment within our culture, that is discernment.
Yeah.
Because it's quick, but you still are making informed decisions. But it's a little bit different than the understanding of what we have in the Old Testament when it talks about discerning or meditating, where it's all encompassing as opposed to what will this actually produce.
And I think depending upon our situations too, there's different, we'll say, decisions or pathways that call for the different things. Where there's ones where you might be faced with that situation with your child right then and there, and you need to make a very wise decision of what am I going to do? You don't have time to take a step back and sit and pray and meditate on it. Where there's other ones where, as you said, we probably make too quick of a decision and don't truly rest in it and wrestle and discern through the Holy Spirit of what we're truly supposed to do. And probably because we fall into that consideration mode and say, you know what, at the end of the day, this isn't that big of a decision for me.
Right.
So why am I going to bring it to God and wrestle with it instead of giving him our everything? We give him our 25%.
Well, and even, sometimes doing that, even when we make the wrong decision of, I don't need to take this to God, we still make the wrong decision of, wow, this is a much bigger decision than it actually is.
Yeah.
Which is why having all three of these is probably a good option.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, some decisions are not that big, and so you don't have to sit for 3 weeks thinking about it. Some decisions have to be made quickly, and so that's where part of what Chakma is that it's shrewd administration. You're getting it done quickly but efficiently. Some of these things need to be thought on for long periods of time. And all of those are very good things to do. And if we are saying that it's a fruit of the Spirit hopefully will be able to help us determine how we are supposed to even be thinking on these things.
And if it continues to become a learned behavior, then
Right, it
when
becomes
we're,
a learned
when we're
behavior.
facing those situations that are more immediate, then I think we can rely on and trust in the Spirit
Right.
of I know the outcome and I know the decision I need to make.
Now, in the New Testament, you should, even without looking at the notes, be able to figure out two. You should be able to figure out one for sure. Two of them you should be able to figure out. The third one you probably won't. But again, we have three different terms that are used to describe this idea of wisdom. And this is part of where we start to get into why it gets confusing for us as Americans again. Is because of the way that the Greeks define wisdom as well. Because we just looked in the Hebrew, it's the Jewish understanding of wisdom. And it's much more complex than we give it credit for. And it's honestly much smarter than we would ever give it credit for. In the New Testament, do you know what the first one is without looking?
Well, I mean, I did look at the notes earlier.
Did you know what it was, though?
I did know the first one, and part of it was a rejogging of memory because we have there's a third-party resource that provides different classes that people can take online, and it's called Sophia Learning.
Yes.
So the first word is Sophia, and I remember looking up, I was like, oh yeah, this is wisdom.
Yes, wisdom or skill.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, same thing we've been talking about. The idea of learning a skill is the same concept as gaining wisdom.
What do they say to master something? To be a mastery, is it 10,000 hours?
So, from my understanding, is that it depends on the person. That there is no actual hour mark that says you've mastered it, because some people are capable of mastering things quicker. Some people are not. And that is much more of, that's not necessarily even a skill level thing or a wisdom thing. It's a matter of just the way that they are designed.
Yeah, I was taking a look at it here. It's called the 10,000 hour rule, popularized by Malcolm Gladwell. And basically saying, hey, if you can do anything for 10,000 hours, you would typically be considered a master in the complex skills and materials of that said task.
Which is not surprising, because 10,000 hours, if you actually can do that, you're going to be pretty good at it, or you're going to be extremely terrible at it because you haven't learned anything. There's only two options.
There really is. And so that's why I think of like the true time spent into something, which I think we even talked about in college, of our time running. We're like pretty sure it's over 10,000 hours.
Yeah.
But I guess you could also say with a lot of people of driving, I would think in your lifetime you would at some point hit 10,000 hours, and you still might not be the wisest driver.
I mean, yeah, if you've been doing what I've been doing for the past 3 years, you definitely are probably getting close to 10,000 hours. But if you are just a normal everyday driver, it's going to take you a while to get there. But the idea of Sophia, though, for learning the skill and learning wisdom is a little bit different than what we talked about before with the learned behavior, which is much more what you were dealing with, because it's about gaining clarity. So it's not just learning a skill. It is actually about having clear knowledge, clear understanding, clear skill within that field. Nobody is going to be able to say that you don't know what you're doing. even though they're still going to say it because
Mhm.
that's the way the world is. That's what we're dealing with. And this is we see this with words that we use that some people know are talking about wisdom, other people do not. Philosophy. Do you know what it means?
Study.
Break it down. Not study. Philo. The love of. Sofa. Wisdom. Philosophy is the love of wisdom. The other one that people don't necessarily think of when they think of wisdom is sophistication. There's a reason why smart people are called sophisticated. Because they exude and are defined by wisdom. They are sophisticated, they are wise. It's not supposed to be about your money, which is what it normally gets thrown at, is sophisticated life is all about money.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be about their mind, not their wallets. But throughout history, money has been associated with wisdom, which is a whole nother discussion that we can have later on. Other Greek words that are used within the New Testament for this. The other one that I was pretty sure you weren't going to get.
I would have never gotten this one.
Was phroneo, which is understanding or just thinking. Because again, we are talking about thinking. But thinking is different than wisdom normally.
Mm-hmm.
This idea, though, is about an inner thinking. So now we're back to the ideas of consideration and discernment. It's about inner knowledge. So it's something where we are thinking about it with our heart, not just our head. And the name comes from the idea, phren is the chest cavity area and the muscles around your heart and everything like that. So you are thinking with these muscles, not your head muscles, which leads to personal understanding of things. And what's interesting is that the word can be used interchangeably in the New Testament, because you've got that idea for people that are just making their own decisions and their own choices and their own opinions. But you can also have the idea of thinking about things with the Spirit, because the Spirit is within us. And so we are thinking with our inner thoughts and our heart. If our heart belongs to God, then we are going to God with our problems. But it's also the word that is used for personal opinions and for just relying on our own understanding.
Yeah. The first thing I was thinking of was more of the fight or flight mentality too, because usually it's kind of our gut instinct that we go off of initially and what our natural tendency to revert back to is.
Well, I don't know that you would necessarily throw instinct in with this, because if it is supposed to be about inner thought, there's got to be a pause. The instinct may play into it. Especially when we're talking about a person that is doing this idea without the Spirit. Personal instinct is going to take over at some point.
Yes.
But there is an idea of a pause and a thinking on these things, which again is not something we're very good at.
No.
The third word, which you had a chance at knowing, I wasn't sure if you would or not.
I would have known this one.
Is what?
Gnosis.
Gnosis, which literally just means knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to get into a little bit about, there's a little bit of a difference between knowledge and wisdom. But this idea of knowledge is one that is experience-based to the point of where we would talk about mastery. It's experience. It's, I've lived in this. This is also the word that we get for Gnosticism, which is, because this is you may not, because you're not as involved with the debates as I am. Is this a term that you hear thrown around a lot as far as you are Gnostic or agnostic?
Usually for me, no. But sometimes it's more, when it is used, it's very much in like Christian.
It's used in Christian circles. It's used as an insult within Christian circles.
Yes.
And most of the time it's used, people are not using it correctly because they actually have no idea what it is. Gnosticism and agnosticism are both defined by different people different ways, and most of the time it has nothing to do with the actual heresies of agnosticism or Gnosticism. Gnosticism itself is that this idea that Christ was just a lower being, normally human emissary, that was given divine knowledge. And so he had experienced divine knowledge, and so he had gnosis, which is why it is called Gnosticism. A lot of problems with that heresy. If you really want to start into it, you can read the blog I did on Docetism, which is the same sort of ideas. But those are the words that we've got in the Bible. There's a lot of them. It took a lot longer to go through definitions this time than it normally does because there are a lot of them.
And that goes back to why you said this is more complicated than
it's
one
more
might
complicated
think.
than we think, because we say wisdom and everybody wants to go to Solomon. Or everybody wants to just go, don't be wise in your own understanding.
Don't be a fool.
Don't be a fool. Don't be stupid. Keep it simple. All these different things that we say all the time. But wisdom is way more complex than that, because even the idea of don't be wise in your own understanding, there are two different words that are being used there. We think of wisdom and understanding as being the same thing a lot of the time. But yet we've got multiple words being used, whether you want to translate it into Greek or you want to read it in the Hebrew. You've got two different concepts of thinking and discerning and understanding and wisdom that are lost on us.
Yeah.
And so the question then now, Brandon, is what is the actual difference between wisdom, knowledge, and understanding?
You want me to
Yes,
answer
I
that
want
a
you to
little bit?
answer that. I know you've been gone for a while, but I still want you to answer.
Just making sure it wasn't one of those rhetorical questions.
No, this one is not rhetorical.
Still scarred from 12
Yes.
Days of Misfits. So, do I need to use it in a song? No. I would say...
Hum it out.
Speaking of that, do you see Google has a new feature now that if you just hum out a song, it'll give you...
So it's like Shazam.
It's like Shazam, but with humming.
humming.
Yeah. Anyways, side note, if you need to use that out there. So I would say that the difference with wisdom is, again, the ability to know right from wrong and then act upon it. So you are determining that decision and then moving forward with it.
So there's a morality base to it.
Yes. Knowledge is, I'll say, like the gathering up in your brain. I'm trying not to use the word knowledge. The gathering up in your brain of different information that would lead you to making a sound decision, but it's not been acted upon. It's just, in my mind, sitting there in your brain, not being acted upon. And then understanding. This is the one that I think is more challenging to give a definition to. I think it's based upon your lived experience, what you're able to as an individual comprehend and wrap your mind around, and what you're able to like contextualize of, based upon my lived experiences, this is all I can fathom or even come to the conclusion of, because this is all I can personally wrap my mind around.
So wisdom, you're on the right track with. Knowledge, you're definitely on the right track with. Understanding, you're getting close.
2/3 of a point.
2/3 of a point. Ho, ho, ho. So knowledge is data.
Mm-hmm.
It's information. That's literally all it is. Knowing facts means that you are knowledgeable. Nobody would disagree with that idea.
Yeah. Careful with nobody.
Well, yeah, we know how online is. Nobody that has knowledge would actually make.
There you go.
There you go. So, wisdom, though, doesn't rely on knowledge, does it?
Doesn't have to, no.
But we associate those that have a lot of knowledge as people who are wise.
Mm-hmm.
That's why professors get paid a lot. Is the assumption is that they are wise because they have a lot of data.
Yeah.
But those two things are not actually connected. Wisdom and knowledge do not actually have to go together. They are two separate ideas. Having a lot of knowledge does not make one wise. Somebody that is wise does not have to have a lot of knowledge. And in a lot of cases, knowledge gets divided up as well between life experiences and books.
Mm-hmm.
Those are two different ideas of knowledge. But like you were saying, one of those leads to wisdom most of the time. One of those does not. Life experience will lead someone to hopefully become wise. They are learning from their behaviors. They are becoming wise, which was the definition we gave out of Chakma.
Well, I would say it would lead to either becoming wise or a fool, because
and that's the other side is if you don't learn from the behaviors, you go the opposite direction from wise.
Which I think we're kind of laughing at about it here, but honestly, from like the true human standpoint, we do that more than we think.
We do that a lot.
Of how many times we have to ask God, forgive me for the same sin again. Well,
I mean, that is the human instinct
mm-hmm.
that we were talking about, as far as the fact that sometimes wisdom is actually the getting rid of that human instinct. What is the first thing that Adam and Eve do after they have shame? They immediately try to
clothe themselves with leaves.
and hide. Which means that they did not learn from their mistake that they just did. And because of that, they looked like fools.
Mm-hmm.
Because they tried to hide from the all-knowing, all-seeing God. It is human instinct to run away from actually learning from our mistakes. Because learning from our mistakes is hard. Because we have to acknowledge that we made a mistake in order to learn from it.
We got to put the flashlight on it.
Wisdom is something that is not easy and not natural. Now, we left out one because knowledge was normally pretty easy. Mm-hmm. We divided it up a little bit more into whether you're talking about data or you're talking about life experience, but most people know knowledge is just the data. What do we do with understanding? Because understanding and wisdom seem like they would share the same sort of attributes. How do we differentiate between those two things once knowledge is off the table?
I mean, as I said, I think understanding is from a personal standpoint, that you can only comprehend what you know or don't know. And wisdom can go beyond that, even from like a trust standpoint of trusting God.
Ooh, that's a good word to add to wisdom. We'll come back to that. Make sure you remember that.
Trust. All right.
Yeah, remember that one. Because that's an aspect we haven't actually hit with all of these yet, but we will. Well, you're leaving out something that you actually had said earlier on in the episode when I asked you to define these things.
All right, pull it out because I'm missing it.
Understanding is about application, right? Wisdom doesn't necessarily, within Webster's terms, have to be applied. Wisdom is having the understanding and having the knowledge, but not necessarily actually applying it. Understanding requires us to actually apply it. In order for me to show that I understand something, I have to actually do it. This is why when we go with the skilled worker side of wisdom, most of the time to actually be certified, you actually have to pass a test, or you have to spend a lot of time showing you have understanding in a student context as an intern or an apprentice, depending on what the work is. Understanding is about the application side of things. So when Proverbs says, do not lean on your own understanding, it's talking about this idea we cannot rely on just our application of doing these things. We have to instead have wisdom beyond that. We don't just apply the knowledge. We have to think on the knowledge and let that inform how we apply it.
Yeah.
We're back to the 3 tiers.
Mm-hmm.
It starts with Christocentric theology that we then think on before we apply it.
And that's why I was thinking of trust. And I feel like without trust in a biblical sense, you also can't remove faith within there too. So that's the other big aspect of, again, if we're in tune with the Spirit and truly discerning and wrestling of our decision and what should be made, there has to be the level of faith and trust in God in that.
Well, and even beyond the faith side of it, are you going to trust somebody that you don't think has the knowledge?
No.
Are you going to trust somebody that is a fool?
No.
Are you going to trust somebody that does not have understanding, even if they are shown to have the knowledge?
No.
No. Trust is a natural byproduct of seeing and recognizing wisdom.
Yeah.
Trust in terms of the faith side of it goes into why we have been saying this is a fruit of the Spirit all along.
And that's why typically if you hear from any guest speaker, you go to a conference, what's the first thing they start off with? Their credentials. Because they want to at least say, this is why you should listen to me.
I have
because I have done X, Y, Z. Yes.
And that's also part of why, because when we have guests on here, we put their title on most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Even when they ask us not to, we still do it. Because it is actually an important thing. This is why you should be able, this is why we are talking to them.
Mm-hmm.
This is why we want you to hear from them. This is why we ask them to do this. Is because of the fact that they have not only gone out and gotten the knowledge, they have shown that they are able to apply the understanding of it. But beyond that, when we go back to the idea of wisdom as trust in God, that is where we get back into the fruit of the Spirit side of these sort of things. The first reason that we are able to say it is from the Jewish understanding of wisdom again, which is something that, again, there are a lot of different views on this. There are a lot of different views that are not accepted on this. The ones that we're going to lay out are ones that are pretty much agreed upon all the way across the board within Judaism as a faith. Wisdom is a huge, huge thing within Jewish culture. And we see this in those different writings that we were talking about, because the Jewish understanding of wisdom is that it is a divine attribute. This comes from God. And it is a divine attribute that was a part of creation,
mm-hmm.
which is why we need to care for creation and why we need to actually learn from creation in some ways. And it is a part of what makes us Imago Dei, because wisdom is a part of God and is a part of God that was involved in creation. And so this is what we see. Proverbs 9:10, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom.
Well, wisdom, yeah.
Wisdom is the actual word there, even though it gets translated knowledge, because again, English screws everything up.
True. I was looking through that and I was like, this seems a little skewed.
Well, yeah, wisdom, because again, wisdom and knowledge are not the same thing. But why would the fear of the Lord be the beginning of either one of those words?
Mm-hmm. Well, and that always, as we've probably talked about on here before, a lot of my faith growing up was built upon fear of, if you don't follow God, this is going to happen. Or if you make the wrong decision, this is going to happen. And so very much of that discerning, but from my own self standpoint. So when I saw the beginning of wisdom is fear of God, I was like, this is interesting. And we've talked about before, it's like, it's a different level of fear. It's more of a respect aspect.
It's respect, and it's the word you've been using. Trust.
Yeah. I was going to say in worship, acknowledgement. There's other words that we can
you
put in
hadn't
there.
used those words today, so
No,
that's why I didn't go there.
no.
Yeah. Yeah,
You didn't read my brain?
Not this time.
But there's that level of, I know who sits on the throne. I know who is in control of it all. So why would I lean on my own understanding when I can rely on the one that is in control?
Well, and if we are understanding that wisdom comes from God,
Now, he says we can ask for it.
the healthy fear, the respect, the trusting of God is what will eventually lead us to actually being able to gain wisdom. Because the fear of the Lord requires us to be seeking out him.
Yeah.
Whether that's in the Jewish understanding of seeking him out or the Christian understanding of seeking him out, both of those will eventually lead us into seeing the wisdom that comes from God alone. It's also what we see in the book of Job, which the book of Job is one that gets misused and applied in a bunch of different ways all the time. But wisdom is actually a important feature of the book. One of the things that I've been saying for a few years now is that the thesis of Job is verse 21 in the first chapter, but not the whole verse, just the last line, which is, blessed be the name of Yahweh. Job 121 is, naked I come, naked I leave. The Lord gives, the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of Yahweh. That's the whole verse. And everybody focuses on the first section of the Lord gives, the Lord takes away. There's a whole psalm about it. But the importance to Job was blessed be the name of Yahweh. That is why he was able to go through the book without sinning, which is the key phrase that is used over and over and over. Even when God shows up at the end and tells Job why he's wrong, it was not because Job was sinning. It was because Job was what? He was trying to be what? And this is where, again, we don't think of it this way, which is why I get to ask and watch your head spin.
So I'm trying to figure out what you're at.
What is it that so when God shows up in Job, he gives long monologues of who he is and what his power is. And it's all about, where were you when I did this? Where were you when I did this? Are you capable of doing this?
Yeah.
Because Job had gone this entire time relying on his understanding of who God was.
Yeah.
And not relying on God showing who he was.
The part that always astonishes me too about Job is the chronological standpoint of where Job was in the Bible. Of a lot of times we open it up and we're like, oh, this was part way through or halfway through the Old Testament, where truly it's kind of towards the beginning.
It's towards the beginning chronologically,
yes,
but it's included with the writings. It's Job, Psalms, Proverbs.
Yeah.
Job is a book of wisdom. It's a book of poetry, which is also why it's there, but it is a book of wisdom. It shows us who God is. It lets us understand who God is in the midst of suffering. It's what shows us that the key to dealing with suffering in a way that does not lead us to sin is saying, blessed be the name of the Lord, and relying on his understanding of what peace and patience and joy actually is.
Yeah. And again, without the Holy Spirit. That's why there's like so many things of that. I'm like,
and
wow.
Without the Holy Spirit, it becomes much harder.
Yes. I'm like, Joe really had it hard.
And then we also, again, the Jewish understanding of wisdom coming out of Solomon, in the not necessarily in terms of just Solomon was wise, but the fact that what Solomon understood before he had even been granted the wisdom, was that the wisdom that comes from God was the greatest thing that he could get for his people.
Yeah. And he saw that in part from David.
And he saw David exemplifies a lot of it. Much more, David exemplifies the understanding, though.
Mm-hmm.
David was much more hands-on than Solomon. But Solomon understood that the wisdom was what was needed in order to actually complete what he was called to do. That is much more of what we see within the Jewish understanding of wisdom. This is part of why wisdom is associated with beauty a lot of the time, is that wisdom is a treasure. It's a richness. It's a wealth.
Well, even in Proverbs, it's all taken to the pronoun of she.
Yeah, and this is also part of where, and we're going to get into why a lot of the uproar over pronouns is just ridiculous for Christians. Because what we see in Scripture is that God does not have pronouns. Because there are places where his attributes are listed as masculine and male. But there are also places where God's attributes are listed as female. And the female ones are the ones that, at least within Jewish culture, are the one that we should be striving after. We should be striving after wisdom, not after wrath. But we don't think of it in that way.
True.
And it goes even further when we go to the Christian understanding of this, where we understand that it is the Spirit that provides us with this attribute of God. The Spirit is listed many times as with female attributes. It's also listed a lot of times with no gender attributes whatsoever. Mm-hmm. That's why a lot of times when you hear us talking about, we will actually refer to the Spirit as it. Because the Spirit has all of these different types of attributes all together, but one of the first things that Jesus introduces the Spirit to us with is this idea of wisdom. When I send the Holy Spirit, he will reveal what I have taught you. When the Spirit comes, he will counsel you. He will provide you with the peace that passes understanding. That's out of John 14 specifically that we're dealing with there. The Spirit is the wisdom. That's what the Hagia Sophia, which is the giant, huge mosque in India. I almost lost the name.
I almost said that.
I know. In India, was originally a Christian temple. But it was about the wisdom of God. High wisdom. It was about the wisdom of God. It was a temple that was supposed to encompass the magnitude and beauty of it was supposed to help you understand what it feels like to be enamored with the Spirit of God. Wisdom is how we identify the Spirit most of the time, outside of the other fruits of the Spirit that everybody wants to talk about.
Yeah.
The Spirit is the one that renews our mind. Right? Romans 12.
Yeah.
The renewing of the mind comes from the Spirit that forms us into the will of God. But that renewing of the mind also is a changing of the way that we understand the world around us. And this is part of why it's much harder to differentiate wisdom and understanding, especially when we're talking about it in fruits of the Spirit.
Yeah. The other verse that comes to mind, which I feel like specifically talks about this, is in James chapter 3.
Yes.
It says, starting in verse 13, "Who is wise and understanding among you? Let them show it by their good life, by deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom. But if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth. Such, quote unquote, wisdom does not come from heaven, but is earthly, unspiritual, and demonic. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder and every evil practice." And I love this next part because I feel like this truly gives the basis of why it's considered part of the fruit of the Spirit. "But the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. Peacemakers who sow in peace reap a harvest of righteousness."
It's the fruit of the Spirit.
Mm-hmm.
we can't begin to even comprehend who God is without him revealing it to us. We can't begin to even try to live out a life of faith without the Spirit revealing what that actually looks like to us.
Yeah.
And that's what we have there in James, is the fruit of the Spirit listed as understanding of them.
Mm-hmm.
Peacemakers, not just peace. Going out into the world and sowing it, not just sitting back and thinking, well, is this peace or is this peace? Or what is peace in anyway? Which is a conversation that I've had 3 or 4 times in the past. Already this year, we've already had that discussion on multiple different shows. But the application of it comes from a wisdom that is not our own. It cannot be found without God's provision of it through the Spirit for us to be able to actually take the fruits of his work and apply it in the world. And this is also why it's part of this mini series on actually understanding what we're talking about when we talk about Christianity. Because this is something that cannot be comprehended without the Spirit and without the wisdom of God and the renewing of our mind to understand the will of Christ. Contentment can't be understood without the Spirit.
Yeah.
We talked about that with the contentment episode. What we just read in James, peace cannot be understood without the Spirit. That's what we did in the peace episode. That's what we did last week. Even Tamiko and I touched on it. I touched on it 2 weeks ago on the Buddy Walk with Jesus episode with Joe and Tiara. We just talked about it in James 3. Peace cannot be applied without the Spirit. This is why Christians are supposed to be the peacemakers in the world. Without the Spirit, it cannot be done.
Mm-hmm.
We can't understand salvation. Salvation does not make sense. Anybody that tells you it makes sense doesn't understand it. It makes no sense for a perfect, holy God to sacrifice himself just so that he can have relationship with us.
Yeah.
That does not make sense.
No.
Unless the Spirit has revealed who the Father actually is.
Mm-hmm.
The Father is love. The Father is peace. The Father is joy. The Father is the one that wants his creation to experience that because we give him joy.
Yeah.
We can't understand sacrifice. Why is it that, we did this with Tamiko? Those of you on X, Twitter, formerly known as Twitter, whatever you want to call it, saw it a few weeks ago with the tweet we went over last week. Why is it that it's so hard, even for Christians, to understand the idea of martyrdom and sacrifice and actual persecution and what the church's call is? Because sacrifice is not a natural thing.
Mm-hmm.
Giving of ourselves is not something that is understood without the Spirit of the God that sacrificed himself. We can't understand missions at all. Like, missions can't be done without the Spirit of God. Plain and simple, it cannot be done. If you think you can go out on mission and be effective on your own understanding, then you, 1, have never actually gone out on a missions trip. And 2, you don't actually understand what the point of you going is.
Or I was going to say, which we've talked about at Third Street, is you'll become burnout potentially, or you'll become isolated.
And burnout is going to happen if you don't have the Spirit.
Yes.
Because the Spirit is the one that provides us with what?
Strength.
But more specifically, joy, peace.
The things that will fill us up.
Patience. The things that allow us to not be burnt out. If you have joy for what you are doing, burnout is not an option. And that's something that mental health people are going to yell at us for. But again, it's not something that makes sense outside of a understanding of what the Spirit of God is doing. This is why the apostles, when Jesus turns to them and says, "Are you going to run away too now that things are getting hard?" Their response is, "Where would we go? You are the one that has the truth, the wisdom of God. And that wisdom is what will give us joy and give us peace and give us patience. And it also is the only way we can understand the truth, because the truth is Jesus.
Yeah.
And who is it that reveals Jesus to us?
Holy Spirit.
The Spirit. Wisdom is a much more complicated idea than we think because it is complex.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's a very simple idea in that we don't have to try to figure it out on our own. Because like we just said, it only can be figured out with the Spirit in general.
Yeah. And so that's why I want to kind of even leave off with this of, okay, now coming away from this episode, hopefully you have some more knowledge and understanding,
Yes.
but then what's next? So as it says there in James chapter 1, specifically starting in verse 5, if any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. But when you ask, you must believe and not doubt, because the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. And I think part of the important part of that was one of continue to ask God, go to the throne, ask for that daily. And the second part too is, I think, again, as we talked about at the very beginning, a lot of times wisdom, we think of Solomon. So we think that we have to have this position of power first,
Right,
before we can have wisdom, which is clearly not the case. And I love that of God gives generously to all without finding fault. He doesn't hold our past and record against us. And that should be celebrated too, and that we don't have to have a position of power. We can ask for wisdom daily, no matter where we're at or what we've done.
And even beyond the position of power, the idea of he gives it generously without finding fault also would apply to those that are told that you're too stupid to understand this.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's something we didn't necessarily get into here. But, Tamiko and I have talked multiple times, and we talked about this with Beth Allison Barr as far as the anti-intellectualism within Christianity, as far as the fact that academics and the church butt heads more than they actually meet together.
Yeah.
But there's another side to it as well, of the way that the church handles things like disabilities, learning, developmental delays, things like that. God does not see them as faults.
Mm-hmm.
He gives generously anyway.
Mm-hmm.
There's a reason why this is an important piece to end on as well, because this is something that came up recently in the past week of a well-known Christian satire site making jokes at the expense of people with developmental delays and thinking that they were justified in doing so. Luckily, there was uproar from most sections of Christianity, even those that normally are ones that disagree with everything that we ever put out. We saw even some of them jumping on saying, no, this is way over the line. Because God does not see these as faults.
Mm-hmm.
They are image bearers. They bear God's image because of the fact that that is not what gives them their imago Dei is what gives them their worth. The delay that you are making fun of is not what gives them their dignity and their worth.
Yeah.
Because, like we said, wisdom does not require the head knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
Wisdom is about an understanding of who God is and what God is giving us, and God gives it freely to anyone who asks in faith.
Yeah.
And now we're back to trust.
Mm-hmm. And the other part too, the other attribute of God is he's gracious, is the other part of this too. Again, without finding fault.
Right.
He shows us grace and mercy within that too. So that's always the important part of in our small group last week. Emily and I, one of the first questions we started off with was, what are some praises of 2023? Because so many times we forget about the prayers and things that God has answered, and we forget to rely on his goodness and of who he is, of his attributes. And so as we come into a new season or this new year, as I said, what if your prayers that you have for this year never get answered? Is God still good? Is he still who he says he is?
And
the answer should be yes. And
that again is the understanding of wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
Because understanding that even if my prayers seem like they did not get answered, blessed be the name of Yahweh is still the correct response.
Mm-hmm.
Because the fact that you are able to have prayers in 2024 means that God did what what you asked him to in 2023,
Mm-hmm.
because you're here now. That was what, when everybody's like, well, what, when we were asked, I don't think it was in our small group. I don't remember when it was. Somebody had asked, what were you most thankful for in 2023? Said the fact that it's gone is what I'm most thankful for, because it was not a good year at all. The fact that we got to 2024, we understand the fact that God is the one that got us here.
Yeah.
And that doesn't come from head knowledge, because head knowledge is like, well, we got here somehow.
Yeah.
That proneo, that inner knowledge, that thinking of it on the heart, the allowing of a renewed mind is what allows us to say, God got us here. And so God's going to continue to get us through this year as well. Even if it looks like to the rest of the world that he's not.
Yeah.
Which, again, cannot be understood without the Spirit of God, which is why it's a fruit of the Spirit. So let us know what you think. If you want to let us know what you were most thankful for in 2023, we'll listen to that as well.
They're going to say, wait till Thanksgiving.
Wait till Thanksgiving. No, we'll listen to that as well. Yeah, let us know what you think. Is this how you've ever thought of wisdom? Is the first question with all of that. Is this even what have you ever thought of wisdom as being a fruit of the Spirit, or has it always just been something that is just there? What do you think? Let us know, all that good stuff. Again, reminder, this we don't know when we're releasing at this point, because it may be Tuesday, it may be Thursday. I've got a new job that is going to make Tuesdays a little bit harder, so it may be coming out on Thursdays now. So just bear with us as we go through this. You've got new schedules as well in terms of everything you're doing.
Yes.
and when you're going to be around. we kind of covered it when we introduced Karen and Tamiko, that you've got a full-time job. You're also a student getting your MBA. You also are leading the Bible study. You're also a husband. You're also doing home repair and a bunch of renovations
and all the other things.
So yeah, Brandon is still here. We have proof he is still here. He did make it through 2023.
Made it.
And he will still be here. Just it's not going to be as consistent as it used to be, but he is still here. He's still doing a lot of the behind the scenes work as well for us. And that's part of why Tamiko and Karen have come along to help fill in the gaps here and there and everywhere. So yeah, just be patient with us. It may be Tuesdays still. It may be Thursdays. We got to figure out what the week is going to look like here over the next month or so, especially. There's also we are still, though, with all of that, schedules, again, is what's making it complicated. The series is still going to continue on. We're still going to be talking with Joel Bowman. We're still going to be talking with Dr. Brian Hudson. We're still hoping to talk to them together if we can find a time that works, dealing with the application of the wisdom that we just talked about in terms of what does it actually mean to be the church? What does it actually mean to be a Christian? And what does a Christian worldview actually mean? How do we actually apply this idea of wisdom and understanding and everything else? So stay tuned for that. Joe is also going to be back here in a couple of weeks. We're going to be talking Lent and understanding what that whole season actually is, because, again, that is not understood well at all either.
No.
We're not sure if it's going to be a Buddy Walk and Misfits co-op, or if it's going to be an Is It Pagan co-op, or if it's going to be all three at once. You never know.
I was like, we can't spin the sci-fi part.
What's not this time.
What's the other one?
Yeah. So we're gonna be doing that here in a couple weeks as well. So stay tuned for all of that. Just be patient with us. Stay tuned to the website for if you think that you're missing something. Stay tuned to the website, and hopefully we'll have the information there. We do have the new website up. It is much more mobile friendly now. You should actually be able to actually navigate through much easier than you ever have in the past. There is some new merch up. The 12 Days of Misfits merch is up now, as well as a couple new items that have come out. And the Tikva gear, of course, is always there. Go get some Tikva gear. We do have some new Tikva gear also. I don't know if I don't think
I've seen that yet.
Yeah, there's some new Tikva gear as well. And again, money from that goes to support the work they're doing here in Canton. And of course, you can always go to Patreon.
Yeah.
Patreon.com/Ministry Misfits. There's some bonus episodes. There's backstage passes when we do live streams. There's early access to blogs when I actually remember to post them. There's a bunch of different stuff you can get. There's exclusive merch items. But the big thing is the Bible studies.
Mm-hmm.
Which, like we said last week, Tamiko and I are in the process of getting it planned. We know what book we're doing. We're pretty sure we even know how we're going to order the book to do it. But as far as when we're going to actually do it, we don't know yet.
That's the biggest mystery.
That's the big mystery that we're going to have to discern and sit on and chew on with our inner beings to discover.
And calendars.
And calendars. Well, yeah, we know how we are with calendars. So... You feeling good, Brandon?
I am feeling good.
You ready for 2024?
I am. It's weird to say. I mean, like, honestly, January's basically over.
January's basically over. And
are we getting old? Is that what it is?
I don't even know, man. we got here. That's all that I know at the moment is we got here. So we will see you guys next week.
The Ministry Misfits podcast is a production of Ministry Misfit Media in association with Overwhelming Victory. Dr. Greg Linville and Andrew Fouts are our executive producers, and Brandon Simmons is associate producer. The Ministry Misfits theme song is written and produced by J.D. Laird and Laird Creative Agency. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can email us at ministrymisfitmedia@gmail.com or by following @ministrymisfit on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. You can also visit our website at www.ministrymisfits.com or through bio.link/Ministry Misfits. If you would like to support Ministry Misfits, you can become a patron by going to patreon.com/Ministry Misfits.